Every day at 4 p.m., a tiny tea stall in Maharashtra's Sambhajinagar, formerly Aurangabad, turns into an informal conference center for EV makers and their vendors. It's right outside the city's newest industrial zone, Aurangabad Industrial City, or AURIC. Here, these EV makers and vendors gather over glasses of ginger tea, swapping stories about production and land allotments. In the backdrop, their phones buzz with factory updates. Now, this scene has been playing out for decades in this city, which is located about 350 kilometers east of Mumbai. Many of these young vendors are old friends. Their fathers built component factories here years ago, and now the second generation is scaling them up for electric vehicles. Dilip Dharurkar is the managing director at NAC Group, which is a nearly 3-decade-old auto components firm in the city. He told my colleague, the Ken reporter Mrunmay, that Samajinagar's EV ecosystem is basically being built with dad's money and not VC funding. For the longest time, India's EV story has long centered on Hosur, a small industrial town in Tamil Nadu near Bangalore. Early EV players like Ola and Ather built big factories there and scaled fast. But rising production costs are now testing the corridor's limits. Enter Sambhajinagar, which is offering something different. Fresh incentives that go beyond just cheaper cost of production. What it has is a generational vendor ecosystem, one where capital, skills, and succession are all already in place. And that is what companies are betting on right now. See, Samajinagar also has a legend which helps with this move. It's basically that every automotive product in India has some kind of a link to the city. A senior officer from Toyota Kirloskar Motor was also someone who definitely was aware of this legend. He took a delegation to the city in 2024 to scout sites for a new plant targeting 400,000 vehicles a year. They went there expecting a standard site visit. What they got instead was basically an unscripted campaign. A group of young industrialists, most of them with no direct links to EVs or automotive, offered to show them workshops, R&D centers, and even other companies' factories. What stood out to an official there was their willingness to adapt to new tech and a kind of hunger to work across industries. He told Runmai that these industrialists didn't seem to be selling incentives. They were selling the city. And it worked. By July 2025, Toyota had an address in Sambhajinagar. Other companies like Ather Energy, JSW Group, and Uno Minda, a component maker, had also begun their move a little before them. Still, it's not that the companies are abandoning Hosur altogether. The city still hosts a dense network of EV original equipment manufacturers or OEMs and suppliers. But it's getting more expensive to build there, and the search for cheaper alternatives is steadily shifting the EV map towards the north. Welcome to Daybreak, a business podcast from the Ken. I'm your host Rachel Verghese, and every day of the week, my co-host Snigdha Sharma and I will bring you one news story that is worth understanding and worth your time. Today is Monday, the 23rd of February. To understand why companies are making this move, you have to understand what's happening in Hosur. Now, the Hosur Sriperumbudur Oragadam corridor is pretty impressive. It spans 280 kilometers, hosting automotive makers like Hyundai and Ola Electric, also Foxconn, the electronics manufacturer, along with a dense web of EV suppliers. Tamil Nadu's government designed its EV policy to capture entire value chains, from components to battery assembly and even charging infrastructure, and also push beyond just two wheelers into cars and exports. But the original corridor is kind of straining under its own success. Land prices in Hosur have more than doubled since 2021. Industrial parks are mostly all filled up. New parcels are being carved out about 15 to 20 kilometers inland, which adds logistical friction, especially for companies that rely on just in time supply chains. Wages have climbed by double digits over 4 years. Attrition runs at 15 to 20% in some beds, which is forcing companies to bus in workers, adding about rupees 2,000 to 3,000 per worker every month. For a mid-sized assembler today, a new Hosur facility means land at rupees 4 crore an acre and power at rupees 8.5 a unit versus Sambhajinagar's rupees 7.4. So, for companies that already have infrastructure in place, Hosur still works. But for others, the corridor is running out of room. And Sambhajinagar gradually began to attract attention for its cheaper land and better incentives. We'll get to the details in a bit. But the interesting thing is, before it became a magnet for EV giants, Sambhajinagar's industrial identity was actually forged through a crisis. In the late 80s, Bajaj Auto's Waluj plant was hit by a major workers' strike. They were demanding wage parity with the company's Pune unit. Workers were banned from entering the premises, and engineers were made to run production. Many of them traveled to the factories every day, while workers pelted their company buses with stones. The standoff lasted 50 days. When it ended with Bajaj prevailing, the company had learned its lesson. It would be foolish to stay dependent on its own capabilities. And so it began outsourcing more components to local vendors. And an ancillary ecosystem was born. Umesh Dashrathi, managing director of Rucha Engineering, a tier 1 auto component supplier, told the Ken that in the 90s, the industrialists of Sambhajinagar banded together against rising union activity. That spirit of collective instinct has only grown since then. From the small units to the larger ones, industrialists that lead all of them would show up at the district administration for the smallest issue and lobby as a group. In fact, when local entrepreneurs needed a testing center in 2022, these industrialists raised 20 crore rupees by themselves and then convinced the government to put in another 80 crore. That same playbook helped launch an electronics cluster and training facilities for EV focused skills. And it is exactly this kind of a well connected, growth hungry mindset in Sambhajinagar's automotive ecosystem that is attracting companies which are looking for alternatives to Hosur. Stay tuned. Here's what makes Sambhajinagar stand out, even in comparison to more established clusters in Pune like Chakan and Talegaon. Since the early 2000s, when growth was slower, a lot has changed. For one, the government started being more focused on industrial development in the area. Sameer Kelkar is the CEO of Grind Master Machines, which supplies precision equipment to both local and national EV manufacturers. He pointed to the second thing that's changed. Apparently, Toyota coming into the city created an anchor, and their move was when things started to ramp up. Take Ather, which has been running in Hosur for 5 years. Over time, it tripled its annual output to 420,000 units. But ahead of its May 2025 listing, it wanted to scale further to manufacture 500,000 electric two wheelers a year by 2027. That meant finding cheaper land, lower energy costs, vendors who had the room to scale or pivot to EVs, and a location closer to its next big customer base in central India. The one place that checked every single box was Sambhajinagar. Sanjeev Kumar Singh, the COO of Ather, told Mrunmai that though the Hosur ecosystem worked very well, one could feel the hunger across the industry and government machinery in the Sambhajinagar region. He thought that the intensity was very different from what he'd seen in other places. And the numbers back it up. Maharashtra Industrial Township Limited reported that between 2023 and 2025, Sambhajinagar's AURIC zone pulled in over 71,000 crore rupees in committed investments. A senior MITL official told the Ken that this is expected to create around 62,000 direct and indirect jobs. The official shared that another thing that stands out in this area is the speed. In AURIC, land is already zoned, utilities are in place, and approvals are integrated. Most firms move from application to construction in 6 to 9 months. That's actually roughly half the time it takes in Pune's older industrial clusters I mentioned earlier, like Chakan or Talegaon, which are home to the likes of Skoda, Tata Motors, and Mercedes. Dharurkar from the NAC group I mentioned earlier said that there are a few factors companies consider. One is whether a vendor has money to deliver on the order. The other is succession. The companies need to know that if they're to deal with vendors for a decade or longer, that there will be someone to take over the business after the first generation. Dharurkar said that the second generation is more than ready to lead, and this excitement is very reassuring for companies. And while this second line of entrepreneurs have the money to build components at scale, Sambhajinagar also comes with other incentives that are substantial. The city is classified as Zone D, a developing region with moderate industrialization under Maharashtra's 2019 package scheme. Companies here get capital subsidies of up to 30%, interest subsidies of 5 to 7% on term loans, and power tariff rebates. Also, stamp and electricity duties are waived off for companies investing in the zone for 15 years. Basically, every EV manufacturer or supplier setting up shop in Sambhajinagar gets 2 to 3 times the fiscal support they would get in Pune or Nashik. For capital heavy projects like Ather's new plant or JSW's EV unit, the difference can cut break even time by close to 2 years. In fact, Ather had considered moving to Chakan before Sambhajinagar. Its COO told Mrunmay that the differences were quite stark. The incentive packages were different and land was more expensive and difficult to get. Of course, land also costs a fraction of what it does elsewhere. In Pune, an acre runs 3 to 5 crore rupees. In Sambhajinagar, it's 60 to 80 lakh rupees. And another important factor, the area comes with a sort of industrial depth that's invaluable. During the 80s and 90s, component makers in Sambhajinagar couldn't really make what was considered as world class parts. But in the 2000s and 2010s, that changed. Experience and exposure gradually caused a shift, the focus on quality increased, and now, with a push from the state, these industries have gained a reputation. Right now, Ather is working with about 50 vendors in a 50-kilometer radius. It's building a factory that spans over 50 acres of land with expansion plans of hitting 100 acres eventually. Still, cities like Pune continue to have a deeper ecosystem with more integrations with tier 1 suppliers and stronger design talent. Sambhajinagar is stronger on manufacturing execution as opposed to high-end R&D. And while the building blocks are there, the build itself is bound to take some time. But Sambhajinagar's existing incentive structure supports long term capital investment. And industrialists like Umesh Dashrati, who I mentioned earlier, are keen on pushing for specific policies that support both research and development. Scale is only part of the city's ambition. The next challenge is capability. Today, like I said, Sambhajinagar doesn't have Pune's design muscle or Chennai's vendor breadth, but it has momentum. It rose to readiness precisely when other clusters were running out of room. And it has something that's harder to manufacture, a proactive, adaptable ecosystem built over generations, which is now ready and hungry for what comes next.
Daybreak is produced from the newsroom of the Ken, India's first subscriber focused business news platform. What you're listening to is just a small sample of our subscriber only offerings. A full subscription offers daily long form feature stories, newsletters, and a whole bunch of premium podcasts. To subscribe, head to theken.com and click on the red subscribe button on the top of the Ken website. Today's episode was hosted and produced by my colleague Rachel Varghese and edited by Rajiv Sien.